evening. I'd like to call to order the Lakewood City Council study session, August 19th, 2019, Council Chambers. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Ball.
Here.
Roybal.
Here.
Gutwein.
Here.
Skilling. LeBure.
Here.
Abel.
Here.
Vincent.
Here.
Vida.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Franks.
Here.
Harrison.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right. Well, thank you. I'd like to welcome is here. The sheriff has been out making his rounds and had actually reached out some time ago that this would be a good night for him to be here. And my apologies that I didn't have him put officially on the agenda. But you are here. Welcome to Lakewood.
Yep. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, councilors. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you just a little bit. You may have heard, including the municipalities. I was served notice earlier this year that I would be experiencing a 7% cut to my budget, and with some other policy decisions and some consequence of those budget cuts, additional revenue impacts would be experienced. So the net of what the sheriff's office will experience within the course of the next 16 or 17 months is roughly a 10% particular impacting jail capacity. So a lot of our focus has been on how do we manage the entirety of the operation of the sheriff's office with the cuts that we're going to experience and $1 million budget cut. And what that means is at the beginning of next year, or by the beginning of next year, I'm going to have to close one of the housing floors of the jail. That's 288 beds. And from where we are today in terms of the jail count, that means that I would have to reduce 200 prisoners that are in the county jail count to the beginning of this year, and then an additional 300 prisoners by the beginning of 2020. Make adjustments in other parts of the organization. One of the rumors I understand that has gone around, and Councilman Johnson, you gave me a call and let me know that there was some dialogue on Nextdoor, that reductions have already begun on a chief judge order signed in 1998 is the ability to let people out of jail when overcrowding conditions exist. And in this regard, overcrowding conditions would exist because I will not have the staff to safely operate the county jail, not because there is not space there. Between now and the end of the year, we're going to be relying heavily on overtime dollars. I can tell you that as of the change that we're going to have to make. This isn't something that I like to come and talk to city councils about, but I am making my way around. Lakewood is a little bit near and dear to me. I told a couple folks that when I was walking in tonight and I saw the little placard for Mayor Ritchie 50 years ago running for the mayor of Jefferson City in terms of crime prevention. You need your police agents to have the ability to tell people or to indicate to people that they're going to go to jail if they harm someone or violate a law. And they have to have the capacity to back that up. If we are having to reduce that capacity by full, and that's what we want the county jail for. I have signed on to support an effort where the Board of County Commissioners have put a question on the ballot for this year, this November. Again, this is not a condition that I want. I take no pleasure in going around and asking people to pay more tax. But the reality is there are certain things that taxes should pay for. And those are the things that people can't do for themselves, and we don't want people operating their own jails. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Specifically of this initiative? I mean, how it's going to work? And
well, the Board of County Commissioners have put a question that relates to property tax, and it's I'm not the tax guy, I'm just the sheriff guy, but it's basically a 7-year timeout on that hit much of the city of Lakewood. It hit Golden too, and a number of buildings and cars were destroyed in Golden, and that insurance payout went against the Tabor cap. So it's a permanent relief on the non-property tax revenues. And so the county commissioners have outlined after the years that follow that, with public safety being the highest of priorities.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Councilor Skilling.
And thank you, Sheriff. I just brought up the language on our handy iPads. It mentions providing for the safety of public, including maintaining adequate jail beds. That's bullet point 1.
Happen, and again, going back to those conversations that may have gone on where people may have developed the belief that we are already releasing people out of the jail. Again, we have not, but there's that chief judge order that permits people sentenced to the county jail to be alleviated, and that would have to change some of the policies on people who would come into the jail. I don't have the authority to release people. That's all done by judicial order. But people that come into jail, we would have to set some priorities and policies. Currently, there are arrest standards that are issued by the nation. There was a change in law regarding the classification of possession of drugs, taking the majority of the possession of drugs from felony classification to misdemeanor. The assessment by the state legislative financial will be more treatment. Much of that would focus on county jails in terms of the shift of population.
Councilor Harrison.
Thank you very much for this information. Would you give us the website where
County are supportive, so
Yeah, we're appreciative
we can
of that,
continue
and
that.
thank you for the time to be here, and thank you for hearing me out.
absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Good evening.
Clerk, please read item 3. We have technical difficulties.
Just a few, but I think we're okay. Item 3, presentation, update on union.
And what I'd like to do is just kind of give a quick overview of where we are in the process, and then turn it over to Holly to talk about the plan itself. Just wanted to give you a little bit of context. This is a check-in meeting, and no formal action is requested. It's part of the process that we plan. It's the Union Neighborhood Vision Plan, and it is, like I said, a component and part of the development dialogue process. The development dialogue process, as you all are aware of, looks at land use and design issues citywide. This particular plan is focused in on one specific area, the Union Corridor. And one of the reasons we're there, looking at the Union Corridor, was being directed by this group to look at land use and design in an area that has some potential for change and has experienced change. If you look at the Union Corridor, you may think, well, there has been development, but there also has been some redevelopment, and it could potentially occur in the future as well. I mean, there was if you can recall, the Marie Callender's restaurant has been redeveloped. The Stuart Anderson Black Angus site's been redeveloped. There have been residential development. So it's an area that potentially could experience some development change in the future. So we wanted to take a look at that and look at, what is the future vision and how is that reflected in land use and design. So the focus is land use and design, a little bit different from our typical neighborhood campus. And the 59-acre site is actually part of the project area. And then to the west, there's Van Gordon with multifamily, single family, Red Rocks Community College further to the west. And to the south, some residential as well. So tonight, before we got into that, I just wanted to touch on previous planning efforts. In the past several years, there have been planning efforts going going back to 2011 with the Federal Center Union Connectivity Plan, the Urban Design Plan, and more recently the Union Transportation Study that was brought to Council in February 2018. These are a little bit different. They're primarily focused kind of on the right-of-way area. And we're looking at not only the right-of-way area, but also properties, private properties that are zoned. So this is yet another effort in this area it's really an important area within the city. So tonight, before I turn it over to Holly, just wanted to touch on what we'll be talking about. Holly will be talking about the outreach, the planning process itself, and then recommendations that will be brought forward. And again, land use design, and because mobility was brought up, Holly will talk about some of those recommendations as well. And then where we would move forward from this point on, as we move through the adoption process, implementation would include an overlay that could look at land use and adjustments to ordinances, the zoning ordinance, some tweaking, and also significantly design. We got quite a bit of input on design, and it would lead to design guidelines that could be implemented through a design review committee for this area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Holly to talk about the plan.
Thank you. Good evening, Holly.
Good evening, thank you. Alrighty. I wanted to just provide a brief background on our outreach. The Union area is a little different than some of our neighborhoods. We decided to expand our outreach area a bit. So our outreach included direct mailings to approximately 2,260 addresses within the planning boundaries, and that went to both business addresses and individuals who lived in the area. We also sent out 2 mailings, direct mailings to the first and second contact person for each of the HOAs that you can see in the orange, as well as 3 neighborhood organizations that surround or are adjacent to the area, and those you can see in blue. We posted 7 next door posts that reached approximately 20 neighborhoods and 6,000 individuals. That's shown in the yellow. And then we also reached out to the Union Corridor Professionals Group, and staff from ED attended those meetings as well. And the Union Corridor Professionals Group actually announced many of the meetings in their newsletters weekly. So here is the final kind of tally of our outreach, and you can see many overlapping areas within our defined area of outreach. To get community input, we had 5 community meetings, and I want to say right now that the first meeting on vision and character and function of the corridor was actually held twice to try to make sure that we were soliciting enough adequate input from the community. We also had a meeting on building design, draft recommendations, and then a meeting where we proposed final recommendations. Through these meetings, we had 4 surveys that were available to those that attended the meeting, as well as anybody who wanted to go online and take it at our website for those that could not attend the meeting or would prefer to just, do it online. So our first 2 meetings were basically the same. We had the same survey. And the purpose of this was really to try to start to understand how the Union neighborhood should really start to look in the future. When we first started looking at this area, we realized, this is really a neighborhood, and we need to start looking at it as a neighborhood rather than just a long driving corridor that bisects, our employment areas and our neighborhoods. We started to realize that the Union Corridor, or Union Boulevard, Union neighborhood really sort of functions as 3 different sub-areas or neighborhood areas. We looked at this and divided into 3 different planning areas based on the current land use and function of each of those areas, the adjacent land uses, the proximity, especially walkability, to the federal station and the transit center, as well as landscaping treatments, the relative size of each area, and then the location within the Union neighborhood. So our first planning area is on the north, and it is the area that is adjacent to the Federal Center light rail station. It's bounded by 6th Avenue on the north and 2nd Place on the south. Planning Area 2 is the area between Second Place and Cedar Drive. And this area has quite a mix of uses and does have quite a few residential land uses in this area as well. Planning Area 3 on the south between Cedar Drive, adjacent to West Alameda Avenue, or Parkway, excuse me, is really more of a commercial / light industrial area. So our outreach for this meeting was really to try to get a long-range vision for this area with the question, in 20 years, the Union neighborhood should be a neighborhood that, and it was an open-ended question to allow people to put in their comments and suggestions for what the corridor or neighborhood should look like. We wanted to find out a little bit about the people who were visiting and coming to the corridor. So we asked, why do you visit here? Why do you come here? Do you live here? Do you work here? Do you go to restaurants? Also, what enhancements in the neighborhood would be the #1 enhancement that could try to improve this area? Then we asked sort of a vision question for each of our 3 planning areas, and then asked what missing land use is there that could achieve your vision for the 3 planning areas. The outcomes of these surveys helped us inform the draft recommendations for the vision statement for the Union neighborhood, as well as a general direction for the key characteristics and future land uses for those 3 planning areas. Our third meeting and second survey focused on really the design, building design, mass and scale, materials, facade composition, as well as trying to get as much input as we could from the public on what should the public plaza design look like. Should we include seating areas, play areas for children, water features? And then we asked about public amenities. What would improve the public amenities in this area and where should we focus? And some of the ideas came out: street trees, public art, benches, things that would activate the area. And this is just an example of 2 of the boards that we used for this process to kind of gather input and information from those that were taking the survey and ask their preferences for building design, which include color, facade treatment, public plaza elements that should be included. The outcomes of this meeting helped inform the key characteristics and recommended land uses for the 3 planning areas, as well as key principles for design and some policies for mobility and accessibility within the neighborhood. Based on our first 2 surveys and meetings, we came up with a set of draft recommendations that we presented at our next meeting. And the survey topics for this presented a vision statement, and then the key characteristics for each of the 3 planning areas is shown on the board on your right. We also came up with 4 main design principles for the corridor, and then some policies for mobility and accessibility. And of course, the outcome of this informed our final recommendations for the vision, the land use, design, and mobility. We then went with our final survey and meeting and put forth a vision statement, which I don't want to read in full to you, but if you wanted to read it, it's on page 2 of the document that we handed out prior to this meeting. It was identified as a neighborhood that should be diverse and thriving, walkable and safe, and it should have a variety of restaurants and retail to make it a destination for residents and visitors alike. And as you can see, we've got approximately 89% approval or agreement on the vision statement for the Union neighborhood. We also asked about land use recommendations. We came away with identifying planning area 1 as a gateway, as a destination, as a place where people will want to go and stay and recreate. It should have good public spaces and plazas where people can gather. And it also needs to provide safe pedestrian bicycle connections to the Federal Transit Center. Based on these characteristics, we came up with some recommended land uses that we put forward to the community. And in your packet, if you want to refer to page 4, that might help, because I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here. So before you is the zoning that is currently in place for Planning Area 1. We looked at the permitted uses that were allowed in these zone districts and made some recommendations based on the key characteristics. We recommended that certain land uses that are currently allowed in this area be prohibited. Those would be automobile sales, gas stations, automobile repair, accessory dwelling units, contractor shops, manufacturing, and outdoor storage. The reason we made this recommendation is because we did not feel that those type of uses were compatible with the vision to create a destination and a gateway into the Union Corridor. For our MET zone district, which is our mixed-use employment, we made no changes to the land use, and we said that the development dialogue has already made changes to our mixed-use employment zone district that requires that any development within the ME zone district should not exceed 50% of the total building gross floor area. So there were some parameters put on how much residential could be placed in this area. And also in the MET zone district, our current zoning ordinance has a requirement that the lower two floors must be designed to accommodate non-residential space when it's adjacent to Union. For our MCT zone district, which is the area north of the Federal Center, we did not make any recommendations to change any of the zoning except for our prohibited uses. But we did make a recommendation that we want to make sure that there's going to be adequate park and plaza areas when new development comes in here. And in the MGT, which is our mixed-use general transit station, we added the requirement that would mandate the vertical mix of uses, which retail, office, and or residential. And the rationale behind that is that when we get the retail restaurants on the ground floor, you're activating the area and creating these places of destinations. Survey results for each specific zone district are shown in front of, is shown on the slide here. I think that you can see that about between 78 and 85% of our participants agreed with these recommendations in the different zone districts. Moving on to planning area 2, this was identified as really an employment and residential area. It should be lively. It should have ground floor retail and restaurants to serve those that live and work in the area. And we also need to make sure that anything that comes in has to connect with Union Square Park to take advantage of the park space that's already in the area. Okay, moving on to page 7. Our recommended land uses for this area are as follows. We prohibited the same land uses in planning area 2 that we did in planning area 1, which are the automobile sales, gas stations, automobile repair, accessory dwelling units, contractor shops, manufacturing, and outdoor storage. The rationale is the same as for planning area 1, and that these uses are not conducive to a vibrant mixed-use area. For the MES and the MEU, and there's 2 MEUs on the map there, one more on the east and one more on the west, we did not make any suggested changes, as these once again are within the mixed use employment district, which through the development dialogue there have already been changes made to that mixed use zone district. Excuse me. There is a small portion of MCT also in this area, and we did not make any changes to this as it already requires the vertical mix of uses adjacent to Union that requires like first floor retail, first floor residential. In the MGT zone district, which is our mixed use general zone district, we added the requirement, which is not currently in the zoning ordinance, to mandate the vertical mix of uses when it is adjacent to Union Boulevard. And in the MGU, we made the same requirement to mandate the vertical mix of uses. The rationale behind this is those vertical mix of uses where you've got people living and working and recreating in the same building leads to a good active environment. And as you can see from these results, depending on the zone district, we were at about 76% to 82% agreed with these land use recommendations. And finally, planning area 3 was identified as the local center, and it should be a neighborhood serving center with employment, retail, and restaurants that serve those residents that live near the area and within the area. There was a thought that we should support the light industrial with an arts and local flair, that we could serve as a co-working hub, and that we need to bolster existing uses to increase the vitality of the area. Based on those recommendations, we came up with proposed land uses or changes to the zoning for planning area 3. We recommended that residential uses in this area be prohibited. The reason for that is that we wanted to create this as to be more of a retail and local service center for those living and working in the area. For our light industrial zone district, which is the gray in front of you, we recommended to add certain permitted uses, which would include bars and breweries, galleries, studios, indoor entertainment centers, so we can also start to create that art and local flair that was discussed at the meetings. We made no other recommendation changes as the remaining zone districts, once the residential is not permitted, allow for the recommended use or the recommended character for this area to be a local center. And as you can see here, we did really well. We came out between 80 and 100% agreeing with our land use recommendations and changes to the zoning ordinance here. Next, we presented 4 main principles for our design guidelines, and all these principles were based on survey preferences for what they wanted to see in the corridor. These principles are somewhat subjective, but we have really good survey responses to kind of lead us down what these specific things mean. The first principle is that buildings should respond to and respect adjacent areas. Specifically, it has to reflect the landscape and the unique topography in which it will be located. It needs to respect neighboring properties. This could be with some type of height limitations to help protect views, and also building height transition to make sure that buildings aren't just right up against each other. A second principle was that buildings should be unique. There shouldn't be one prescribed architectural character throughout the corridor. They need to provide interest in human scale. Facades need to be a mixture of transparent and solid materials, and building heights throughout the corridor should differ. And you can also see at the bottom of the slide how the survey responses were coming in. The third principle is to make the area lively. Buildings and sites should offer a variety of experiences. It needs to have ground floor, retail, cafe seating, storefronts, plazas. Landscape should include trees, benches, lights. We need to have pedestrian amenities that will create this comfortable atmosphere, and we need to have public space that includes parks, plazas, and pathways. And our final principle for design guidelines was that it should be sustainable. Buildings need to be developed and designed for the future and taking into consideration sustainability elements. It should also be an area that does help to develop and bolster and support our local businesses and a diverse economy. As Roger said earlier, you know, the charge with this plan was really to look at land use and design. However, when we were at the meetings, there was a lot of concern about the pedestrian and bicycle connectivity and the safety with that, as well as some concern about traffic on Union. So we didn't want to ignore these comments. We wanted to incorporate them in these plans and provide some guidance for the future of the connectivity in this area. These principles and policies are very consistent with all the other plans we've done in the area for mobility. but we wanted to highlight some of those that we felt were important for the community. And that was to make sure that we've got a shared use path along Union Boulevard, that we need to make great pedestrian and bicycle connections, and that we need to make sure that we have pedestrian walkways in the future development or redevelopment that are consistent with the connectivity framework map, which is also included in your packet. And then the other was to manage traffic flows on Union Boulevard. Some of the ideas were promoted was to implement a shuttle system, which was also part of our urban design plan that was done in 2011, and also to implement where we can the recommendations in the transportation study with development and redevelopment, and to have new development participate in the West Corridor Transportation Management Association, or TMA, which is a really good way to get people to try to start thinking about alternative modes of transportation. That was it. Next steps, we will have a draft plan available on the website at lakewood.org/Union Vision on September 9th. September 25th, we'll go to Planning Commission public hearing. On October 28th, we'll come back to you for a public hearing. Then we will set forth and develop the overlay district and design guidelines and the review process for that. Some of the topics that we'll consider while we are developing these design guidelines are really geared and in response to what we've heard through our surveys. So we'll be looking at public plaza design, building material composition, facade treatments, height transitions, mass and scale. And that's the end. Thank you.
Nicely done. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is a study session. We allow for public input. It's your chance to ask some questions that you might have. This isn't really the pro or con. It looks like this will have a few public hearings. So we have only one person that signed up. It'll be 3 minutes, 2.5. Actually, there's a timer on it now, but it'll also go green, orange, red. Diane Duffy, you're the only one that signed up. Great. Anybody else wish to speak? Come on. Good evening, welcome.
Hello, Councilman, people in chairs. Some of the walkways, some of the walkways, usually sometimes they'll use like a softer gravel and the wheelchairs sink in and they can't get by or get into the transportation or a certain amount of space, and that's not happening in the buildings because I have experienced it so much. So that now that I have the opportunity and they haven't built, so maybe they could look into the measurements that are supposed to go into the design. Because it really makes me upset because people with disabilities involved so that the design is accessible.
Thank you. It's important feedback. Anybody else? All right, I'll close public input. Mr. Beta.
Ready for questions? Mm-hmm. Area 1, you don't identify the portions that are federal property. A good portion of that in Area 1, as I understand it, in the MCT designation is federal property, correct? That north of the
Property is kind of in the middle, south of the 59 acres.
Okay, maybe we could put that back up on or do you have them? I've got the map here on the handout, but I don't know if you've got it on the.
Okay.
There we go. There we go. That one.
This one? Oh, it is outside of our planning boundaries, so we did not address the zoning there.
Okay.
The federal center land is within the boundaries, and the zoning, there is zoning on that land, which provides the permissions for what you can do.
Okay, well, the reason I'm asking, because it's all in the same color, it's all gray there, and I mean, you don't have any control over federal land anyway, correct? North, the horseshoe property, now, I don't see any discussion in your plans about this issue of the contamination of this property. Do you take that into account at all in your planning?
That is not part of this planning process. We're just looking at land use and design. So that would be a separate discussion.
Well, and I can jump in here. So we're essentially doing an overlay over this whole property, and it's not dissimilar to when the hospital, prior to the hospital was built, right? You did a plan for that land that was contaminated where the hospital was. You still had a plan, you still had zoning over it, but nothing could be done until they remediated into what it is today.
Okay, so I understand that, but I guess my question is specifically, does any of the planning take any of that into account? And I guess you're saying it's not part of the planning process, if I'm understanding the answer. Is that correct? Is that?
I'm not sure about the survey part. If you want to address that, I was going to touch more on the other issues.
So our survey was looking at what type of land uses and what type of building design should we have in this area. So we were strictly looking at what the recommendations for.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted.
Thank you. Mr. Skilling.
That we had struggled with for the past year and change was the zoning changes that we were doggedly going after. And one thing that we were all very excited about were these neighborhood plans, of which there's approximately 9 of throughout the city. This is the prohibitions, height limits, setback limits, things that we don't want to put as our general zoning categories or in our general districts, but work in a particular neighborhood, whether it's Union or whether it's Academy or wherever in the city it is. These are the things that you'll see rolled out. Hopefully in the next, couple weeks, staff will get to those other 8 plans. Yeah, sure. On all of the T designations, if you look at those zonings, T is kind of a unique creature in that the height or the height minimums or the height maximums vary depending on where you are and which transit. Oak, for instance, may have 90. Other places may have 120 rather than this 180. I think I have heard loud and clear, even though this isn't in necessarily Ward 4, Ward 4 constituents are frequent travelers of this area. And I have heard very clearly that if there was a 180-foot building, 18 stories, if there is concern, whether it be whether contamination comes up as part of a use discussion, I mean, I think that we can be creative with this planning. We can't get absurd, but we can very much be creative with how we design this. And if we're worried about residential, of what this exercise does, is that we can take into account the geography, the history of the properties, the surrounding uses, and say what is best for this particular piece of property. So, thank you. Oh, and thank you for the presentation. That was very good. And for the packet is wonderful. Thank you.
Wright Street and Van Gordon to the north of the West Hills area. Why was that not included? Those folks tell me that they feel like they're part of this neighborhood, and it looks to be a bit.
Follow the boundaries that we've done for all the other planning areas, for all the other plans that we've done in this area. So we tried to make sure that we were copying those boundaries so we could have some consistency.
So what neighborhood plan will that fit into?
A future neighborhood plan.
Really wanted to focus on the areas on the other side of Van Gordon where they do have potential to change a lot of their zoning. Current zoning is the M district as well.
Isn't there a development, is that athletic club, West Point there?
Even though you're looking at one particular corridor and the adjacent neighborhoods to the west, they are still affected by heights. There is one particular townhome area up there that's at the top, and it doesn't seem reasonable to me, even if things are closer to St. Anthony's Hospital, that's a level 1 trauma center with helicopters. I mean, we need to be thinking about what we're doing to some of the other places week after week, but the total number of people that weighed in on this.
I can certainly get that information for you. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay.
We had on an average of maybe 20, 25 people attend each meeting.
And a lot of them were the same, I think, right?
After work. So we have some responses for that we can give you as well if you'd like to see that.
Yes, I would.
And I don't think it's broken down by survey, but it's certainly broken down by overall outreach or overall participation.
Okay. Well, I would just like to throw this out there that high, I don't know, 4 or 5 stories or something, and have shuttle service. I'm just wondering, in all honesty, how realistic that is for the people that are going to live there. I'm just throwing that out. And also is regarding the 59 acres, and the adjacent people in that area are concerned about that land being messed with. Even if it was commercial, you still have to disrupt the soil. And there's a health and safety issue there that I don't have the answer to.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation and the information in here. I think that this is really going to have a big difference in our community and our city as we go through all of these neighborhood plans. So I'm excited to see how the other ones go, and this is going well so far. It talks about the recommendation is to ensure adequate park and plaza areas are incorporated with development. And in some of these other recommendations, like the one below it, for example, it says add a requirement to mandate vertical mix of uses, which to me is a very specific
guidelines. Perhaps standards that over and above what we currently require in our zoning ordinance for plaza and public space. That's one advantage to doing an overlay. So I think you'll see some of that being, fleshed out as we move forward on our design guidelines. Let's see what
and guidelines, the process for that. So basically you're going to take this information that you gathered and collected and then create from that the specific design guidelines.
That's correct.
Okay, great. And then there will be
what the design guidelines would have, some of the preferences, but it would be part of a next step.
Got it.
Where it would have more detail and provide very specific information that would inform the design review committee.
Great, thank you. And so that would include things like.
Thanks, Mayor Paul. First, I wanted to acknowledge that you guys held the first meeting twice. I want to thank you. Obviously, there was some miscommunication. We didn't get it publicized as widely, and I know that takes extra resources, so I certainly wanted to acknowledge that you guys did that. The second thing I wanted to get there, and so just making sure that we kind of look at where our traffic patterns are and then including those folks in there. I think that'll be really helpful. I would also like to ask, as we move forward in this process and for your kind of underlying template, that for the surveys, we always kind of include the numbers that folks out in the public can't always attend, but we've made Lakewood Together and Lakewood Speaks. And so I'm just trying to remind folks that we get that y'all have busy lives, but we are desperately looking for all kinds of ways to get that feedback from you. So we care about that participation. Those on-street deliveries, which are becoming a safety concern. So those are just a few more points to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bida.
Thank you, Mayor. Quick question. Just trying to understand the permitted uses of an MCT. And I'm looking at the use table 17.4, assuming that comes under public, civil, institutional line item, but there's no special mixed use category MCT. Is that correct?
There is.
Oh, there is.
So the MC provides the land use recommendations.
Okay.
And
To show them.
thank you.
Oh, okay. But it's, okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, so one quick follow-up. We did have a question related to ADA and planning, and I don't know if you're the ones to answer that tonight, and if not, maybe we can get some more information back on how that works. So,
Yeah, and
and this you were able to do. It's not your fault. People didn't respond. I think you tried in a lot of ways to get people, and that's always what we're trying to do. And I think Councilor Franks nailed that. You know, trying to get it out there as much as you can. You hit 6,000 homes to try to do that, but good feedback, and it still has a long public process ahead of it via the. All right, will the clerk please read item 4? Mr. Dolan's going to follow up with a report without a recommendation. So this should be a pretty quick item tonight. Welcome.
Yeah, I have 3 minutes. I could probably do this pretty quickly. It's nice to see you all. Jeff Dolan, Director of Human Resources. And as part of our ordinances, we're required to have this conversation with council every 4 years prior to the election of the mayor. So just to give you a little context, again, because I'm a context person, I think information is helpful. As of now, the Lakewood City Council's current annual salary is $12,873. Council members are eligible to participate in our health insurance, dental and vision plans. That was one of the questions that came up during your last conversation with LAC, so I thought I would just verify that yes, you are eligible to participate in that. The last time any action was taken as far as adjusting salaries for the elected body was in 2009, and since then no additional increases have been issued. The Lakewood Advisory Commission, as the mayor indicated, did conduct a thorough assessment and looked at comparables across the country and different types of organizations and different kinds of communities. We were asked as staff to look at their work and add some additional perspective if available and as appropriate. And I would like to provide you with a very quick overview. My department and I actually do compensation for our enterprise. So we have a standardized process that we look at on an annual basis. I presume most of you are familiar with that when you hear us talking about our workforce plan and our total compensation approach. We utilize a series of benchmarks across the local, regional, national markets, and we try to identify what are the best ways for us to deliver compensation for the city of Lakewood. We try to continue to be competitive in the marketplace. Our goal is to attract and retain some of the best talent. We do that pretty consistently, and we use information and data to follow that. If hypothetically the City Council were to follow a similar process and have my team look at compensation and how we would do that and apply that to our model, one of the things that I think that was interesting as we dug into this information is since we haven't really looked at it over the last 10 years, should we have done that? We actually would have came up to two assumptions. One, if we would have assumed a 2% wage adjustment for our elected body, which is pretty normal within a 10-year span, it ranges between 2 and 4%, depending on what the time frame is. But if we use a simple assumption of 2%, since 2019, over the last 10 years, the annual base salary would be roughly $15,704. The Lakewood Advisory Commission, when they did their assessment and looked at organizations of similar size across the country, came into virtually the exact same numbers. So as we look at our internal processes and as we compared it to the Lakewood Advisory Commission, we found that their practice and their methodology was consistent, was accurate and we were actually able to pretty accurately replicate it. I think we were off by $200 over a 10-year span. So as a guiding, one thing I would clarify that was raised in the last conversation during the LAC conversation was, should there be an adjustment made, when would that go into effect? That does go into effect at the beginning of the next council being sworn in, and any elected official sitting at that time would receive that compensation. There is no though.
You only receive it if you're either reelected or you're new. So even if you were to support that and you had 2 years left on your term, you wouldn't be eligible for that until your term ended.
No, you would get it effective when everybody else. That was part of the gray area. We had some dialogue with the city attorneys.
You signed up again for public input. Okay. You just wanted to sign your name. You still have one more chance, and you didn't sign up for the next one. So I will just continue that language because I was here in 2009, and it is my recollection that
Here's the line that I think is of consequence to this discussion. The city council shall neither increase nor decrease the compensation of the mayor or any member of the city council during a term of office, except members of the city council whose terms do not expire at the next regular municipal election shall receive the same compensation as that.
I have seen it applied the other way, that a sitting council person doesn't get the pay raise until and if they're reelected. So how do you explain the dichotomy in that paragraph? One sentence says one thing, the next says something entirely different.
Well, I was going to see if Mr. Cohn was still here because he was part of the Charter Commission and I was not. So it's written as if it were. This is the language that is applicable. And
Cite it.
yeah, and for the record, anybody wants to look at it and judge for yourselves, it's section 2.11, compensation in the Lakewood Charter.
no, I certainly appreciate it. I'm not doubting. My recollection was in 2009 we did it differently in that some were
because the rest of the section doesn't concern that. It starts out with the members of the council shall receive such compensation as the council determines by ordinance, and it ends with a reference to ordinary and necessary expenses. So that sentence is the one that dictates who gets what and when. And I think the compensation is going to be the same for you as it is for the newly elected members, and whether it makes sense or not, I think it can be done. It's not that we can't implement it. And I don't remember what happened in 2009, but we certainly look back at what was happening then.
We'll just continue the conversation.
But I think it's just really, I'm wondering if it's trying to say that those of us who are currently running for office can't be the very ones or unexpired, or vice versa. Since we're running, we can vote because we're going to be affected by by November. So I'm just trying to understand, because anyways, sorry to keep
trying to read into the minds of our city fathers that put this together, but I think part of the idea would be not to reduce the salary of either the mayor or certain council members for political purposes. That's what they're getting at. And then, but if it was a part of a whole process of like giving myself a raise, I can't do that. I think, for me, it's a service. I think it's a service for all of us. I think we're adequately compensated. And I can't support at this point a raise for.
The money that we're paid is to kind of make up for those late nights, the Monday nights that we're not with our families, the Monday nights that we're, the Saturdays that we give up for ward meetings, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's what the money is for, whether it's comfortable to talk about or not. I think it is an increase in what we earn. So I'd be willing to support that.
Ms. Vincent?
I was going to make a comment that the way that we're going, I think the only one who can vote is Pete. community for 20 plus years on all these plans, so they knew I wasn't in it for the money. But I've got to think, win, lose, or draw, I kind of look at it, and I had already talked to Councilor Franks about this too, as the next group that comes in. I won't be here forever, and we need to make a first non-recommendation. So I would support that for whoever comes on.
Mr. Roybal.
Thank you, Mayor. As everybody knows, I am termed out. So we put more than 60 to 70 hours a week sometimes dealing with issues. And we stay steady on the issues. We sacrifice our families to be with constituents, to support our constituents, not just one day a week or another day. It was like 35 cents an hour. So who makes 35 cents an hour in this community? Now, I would simply say very clearly is that the economy is, it's increasing. I mean, so I'm just putting it out there, and I would support this. And again, I would just say, if you want quality of people to come to council, and again, for me, money wasn't the issue. It was just doing something for the community and myself. But, if you want to attract quality people to come, some council. So to all my fellow councilors, I'm going to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gutwein.
Well, that's tough to follow. I agree with everything Pete just said, or 14 or 15,000. The amount of time that you put in, this is not a money-making role. And so, that's not why people are doing this. It's because we care about our community. And I think that every single person up here is worth the time that they've put in, is worth easily. And I think that, if we can help make it a little bit more accessible to a wide group of people that represent our community, that will use.
But there are a lot of folks out there who think we're not. We can avoid the dichotomy of our charter paragraph by saying, let's don't do it for another 4 years and let another council deal with that question. I just don't think that, especially in a time when that would help the budget, because we would be paying y'all $12,000 a year. So I don't want to see this go anywhere. Thank you.
Mr. LeBeer.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just add that I would support moving it forward. I know I certainly didn't do it for the pay of childcare, or to have people who can take time away from their jobs, or people that,
Remember, there was 40,000.
All right. So look at it this way: your term is up, and you can't run again.
Right.
Councilor Roybal. Your term is up, and you can run again, but don't. You're not going to get the money. You can run. Your term is up, and you can run again, and you do get reelected. You're going to get the money at the time of the election. So will you, as person who's halfway through your term. That's really what it.
I understand, but
just
so. But I think at the state level, when they go through this with the legislature, it's just incumbent upon. Yep, if you're 2 years in and this passes, you don't get it, and if you term out,
those whose terms do not expire may be eligible or may receive, and then you'd have more flexibility to say this is how we're going to apply this. It says those individuals shall receive the same compensation as those who get elected. So it's pretty hard to answer.
So I guess if this does go forward, which I'm assuming it's going to, because we're going to have a larger discussion in October, it'd be worth doing
the people are our boss. Why not ask the people?
Do you know how long that ballot would be?
Well, thank you. So, there's Ms. Harrison, your light's on?
Yes, I just wanted to ask one other question.
No.
In the research part.
Kidding.
Research.
Kidding.
Could a particular council member like me who might choose, I'm one of the.
And we went through this exercise in the
No,
past because somebody had asked if they can not receive their salary, and it was, no, you shall receive your salary. So, okay. All right. Now for the main event. Mr. Dolan, thank you. Could have sworn you were in jeans earlier. Officer Juan Bonilla Acosta, as well as Chief McCaskey is here, and Jenna Roth, as well as Mr. Cox. We have the whole crew. Good evening. Sergeant.
How are you?
Welcome.
All right, so we are going to, do we need to pull it up real quick? Yeah, give me 1 second to get the PowerPoint up. Perfect. Won't end up having licenses because they've decided not to rent short-term anymore. They're going to rent more like apartments. And then one is just, it's a corporate one and they're waiting on something from out of state. So it's been kind of slow, but otherwise everyone's licensed. 2 locations that were problem properties before, they decided to sell, and they've sold to new owners who are really excited to work with the city and the police department to reduce their crime rates. So we were asked to address quality of life issues stemming from nuisance properties in the city. We're all familiar with a lot of the problems, rodent infestations. Structural problems has been a big one as of late. Chronic zoning concerns, where they keep on coming up and there doesn't seem to be an end in sight. And then public safety issues, which is why the police department's mainly involved, because a lot of these have those along with it. So, we were, Public Works, the city attorney's office, and the police department came together, and we reviewed recent incidents in the city, kind of if you want to look in the last 2-3 years, because that's when we've seen a lot of these come up that, frankly, a lot of us haven't seen before. You know, when we were meeting tonight in preparation, the chief even said, 35 years of law enforcement, and I have not seen some of the things that we've seen in the last 18, 24 months. So that's why we're here. We looked at other jurisdictions' ordinances. We kept it really local this time. So we looked at Aurora, Denver, Boulder, Golden, Fort Collins to kind of see what they had. And what we came up with is we really want to get something on the ground now that we can use. So we thought the best route was just to strengthen our current nuisance ordinances and add some tools in there to help us better use those. So, specific unlawful condition. Currently, it's not unlawful to have a rodent infestation. So we would like to add that. And we would like to require property owners to abate the infestation in a timely manner. We'd like to be able to tell them, no, you have to do this. You can't, not just will you please, but this is unacceptable. You have to fix it. So if we pass this portion, if a property owner fails to abate the rodent infestation within 7 days, we will have the authority to abate it. More so through a lien process on the property. So we would send a bill to the property owner first, and if they fail to pay, then we would send it up to Jeffco to have it added as a lien on the property. Also, at council's suggestion, when we were reviewing this, a council member said it would be good to consider, can we prohibit feeding rodents? That's illegal. So we're trying to figure out that perfect language. That didn't make it in time in the packet you received, just so you know. All right, so that was one tool we would like to add. Now we're on to another one, and this is a little bit more complex, and I don't think we've talked about this before at all. So what this is for is this is to add the option for municipal courts to issue a temporary restraining order if there's a nuisance property. And you can think of this as like a high, this is as we're going up the continuum of how we're trying to deal with an issue, this gets on that higher, farther end, right? So the example is this. We have certain properties that are derelict. They've had drug activity, criminal activity. They're structurally unsound. The problem we have now is our building officials can condemn the building, but their authority stops at the walls of that building. They have no authority over the property surrounding it. And what we've had happen is when people get their building condemned, one, they break back in, and two, they just loiter on the surrounding property. And you can imagine that the difficulty that makes, one, for law enforcement to ensure that the building's remaining secure. When you have people, we've had people erect tents in their front yard, bring out abandoned cars and sleep in those around their building. You can imagine what that does to the neighborhood and to the neighbors. So what this would be is, in these extreme cases, we could seek a restraining order that would actually restrain the owners or building permits. You're doing all that. So this is something that would help when individuals have already not been compliant with the orders that exist now. We actually found this has been enacted successfully in Denver before. We found that, and we thought that was a really neat piece of legislation to look at. In our nuisance ordinance, the ability to declare a business as a nuisance based on unlawful sexual activity, prostitution, drugs, that kind of thing. We want to add some crimes that we found are nuisance related to residences. And what this would be is drugs. So if you have drugs found at the property, you could be considered a nuisance. Stolen property, or property that's been taken in a theft or received by a theft, think stolen cars is the best example we can give you. Prostitution, obviously, and then 3 or more charges of a zoning related offense in a 12-month period. The reason that 3 or more zoning related offense charges is there is we have a good zoning system, but remember at the beginning when I said we have these zoning complaints that never seem to end, like it's just one after the other after the other. We're trying to identify different angles to go to once we can show persistent and long-term problems. I think the reason that I would be most excited about this is, and I know many of you on his auto theft charge, but the 3 people that were living with Johnny are still there, et cetera, right? Not this Johnny. So I just figured I'd go with my name. That makes it easier for everyone. If I said Adam, that wouldn't go over well, I assume. So, especially absentee tenants who live out of state or something, and it's as long as the rent check's coming in, it sounds good to them, right? And so when you start to talk to them about, well, did you know this is going on? We have the ability to address that through the nuisance ordinance as well. So that's that piece there. On the next one, another tool, require property owners to secure abandoned or vacated properties. And if the owner fails to do so, authorize the city to secure the property at the owner's expense. So there would be timelines involved, statutory timelines. We're not just gonna say, oh, sorry, it's been 24 hours. We're gonna do it. But what we're looking at there is we know, as I mentioned before, that derelict buildings, unmaintained buildings invite crime and disorder. And we want people to have a maintenance plan and secure those accordingly so we don't have issues. So that would be an addition to this as well. Similar to the rodent infestation, we would give a property owner 7 days to come into compliance or request a hearing. Again, have what are called vacant property registration ordinances. And these can go everywhere from the most basic of program, which is what we're proposing, to really, really structured and advanced programs that have fees and have all sorts of things. We're not looking at one with fees. What we're looking at is very simple. If you have a property that's vacant or abandoned, and there would be timelines involved, if it's more than 30 days, then it becomes vacant by municipal ordinance. We would decide on that kind of thing, but you have to register it with us. And what does that mean? You have to provide the city with who owns it, a contact information for the owner, if it's an out-of-state owner, who's the local representative that we can call. So if someone breaks in, we can call them and they can come fix it up. Or they can address the weeds in the front yard or whatever be relevant, but that's totally up to you. So why would we consider doing this? We know vacant or abandoned properties can have a negative impact on neighborhoods. I heard earlier when we were talking about another presentation, property values, right? And people are always probably coming to you talking about my property values, depending on what the circumstances. Oftentimes vacant homes, abandoned businesses are right up there with that. It can also be very difficult for us to contact the property owner when maintenance is needed. Best example I can give from a law enforcement side is it's 2 a.m. We get the report of a party going on in an abandoned building. We go out there, we find it's a bunch of kids, we get them home to their parents safely, maybe write a few tickets, but then we're like, who do we call to lock this up? And we don't have any info, and we end up having to send it to someone to look up property tax ID numbers and then try and search it that way, and it's hours of work. The other issue is we have a history of problems with transients and children accessing these types of properties. We know, we know kids like to go in these places. Oh, it's the haunted, you know, old whatever, or, and although that come off as, you know, just child mischief, which is understandable, the problem is sometimes those things get mixed up and you have children running into people who are homeless or the drug addicted inside these buildings after hours, and that's just a no-go. So that's one reason this can be beneficial. All right, so those are the main tools. So we thought we all loved the scenario thing we did in the Hotel Motel so much, we thought we'd do it here too. So we're gonna start with 123 Alamo. We're getting really creative. In this case, this fine home is owned by a couple whose adult children are drug users and frequent the property. The city, using our current building ordinances, determined the residence is unsafe, right? So there may be structural issues, there may be power issues, oftentimes gas leaks, that kind of thing. The house is boarded up and posted no occupancy, but the owners continuously violate the order and enter the house. They're breaking in. We've had experiences where people have crawled through roofs to get back in, amongst other things. Despite the house being secured, the owner's children continue to use and sell illegal drugs, mainly from cars that are parked around on the property. So if we had the tools that we've talked about tonight, the city would obtain a temporary restraining order, preventing the owners from being at the property, and it can be the owners and their children. If we identify specific individuals that are a problem, that are at risk themselves because they're not listening to the building orders, because we often have these people who move back in saying, well, I'm willing to take the risks, and we say, no, this thing could literally collapse on you. You don't understand. You can't be in there. Those individuals and individuals who are a safety risk to the neighborhood, we could ask that for that restraining order, keeping them away. Also, due to the previous break-ins, we re-secure the home and we decide this is a point where we're willing to fence off the entire property because it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the time and energy for cops to constantly be going around that building every night when we could be doing other things that your constituents ask us to do. And then the police department cites the owners for a nuisance violation. That's the new part I like, right? Cites them and says, no, we know your son and daughter have been the ones selling the drugs, but you're letting it happen. Here's your ticket for a nuisance ordinance. Please go to court. Second scenario. That one looks a little nicer, right? Except for the weeds. 456 Baltimore Avenue, a rental property has been unoccupied for months. The property is not being maintained, but the city has no contact information for the owner, and the neighbors call and complain frequently. So this is a pretty standard one, right? So with our vacant property registration ordinance in place, the city has current contact owner information. The city learns the owner's out of state, and they were just unaware. Oh, sorry, I had no idea. I thought my realtor was on that. Or, what do you mean? I hired a guy who's my landlord for me, and is he not around? That kind of thing, right? So with the guidance from Lakewood Zoning, the property comes into compliance, and everyone's happier. The final one, 789 Catastrophe Court. Would anyone disagree with that picture? The homeowner hoards trash and junk outside the home. The poor condition of the property has allowed for a vermin infestation, and the neighbors are concerned for their health and property values, right? So what does this help us with? The accumulated junk has created harborage. That's a technical term that Jenna helped me out with, allowing for the rodent infestation. This is a nuisance under the proposed ordinance because now we're saying harborage of rodent infestation is illegal along with the rodent infestation itself. You're not allowed to create circumstances where they could be, right? The homeowner is charged for the nuisance violation but does not address the problem. So we ask them to fix it and they don't. So for public health and safety, the city abates the property by cleaning up the junk and exterminating the vermin. We go ahead and go in and do it. Because of that, and we know we're going to incur some costs, but we place public safety and the public welfare above the short-term costs, we seek reimbursement through a lien on the property. So that's really it. I tried to make it quick since I know.
So Sergeant, if you want to take a quick seat, we have public input portion right now. And yeah. So Ms. Kinney, you signed up, 3 minutes. And if you want to start coming down, ma'am.
Cure letter will go out when there's a known nuisance, and it allows 7 days for it to be addressed. And then if it's not addressed, then the city can step in, but it has to go to court. And odor is a nuisance. I looked it up, and it is a nuisance. So I'm wondering if maybe we can't put that in there also. Because like I said, that was the very first thing that brought it to the attention of the neighbors. And then the last thing, I think we're too lenient.